1789, the United States Lighthouse Establishment, USLHT, was created and operated under the Department of the Treasury. All U.S. lighthouse ownership was transferred to the government, which became the General Lighthouse Authority. On July 1, 1939, the service merged with the United States Coast Guard, which took over the maintenance and operation of all U.S. lighthouses and lightships. Abbreviations: USLHS, U.S. Lighthouse Service, LHB, Lighthouse Board, LHD, Lighthouse District, USRCS, U.S. Revenue Cutter Service, USCG, U.S. Coast Guard, USN, U.S. Navy, USLHT. U.S. Lighthouse Tender, A-2-N. Aids to Navigation, assigned to the first LHD upon completion, and used as an inspection tender, replacing the old USLHT Iris at Portland, Maine. After the turn of the century, reassigned to the 9th LHD at Puerto Rico. In June 1915, it was transferred to the 3rd LHD, but laid up in 1916 due to a lack of funds, and later restored to duty. It was laid up again in June 1920 due to a shortage of funds. Columbine was assigned to the 13th LHD as an engineering tender. In 1915, it was transferred to the 19th LHD in Hawaii. A wireless radio set was installed in 1916. In 1918, it moved to Baltimore and Portsmouth, Virginia in the 5th LHD. Hazel was a small, 45-foot, wood-hulled, steam-powered, single-screw launch placed in service in 1893, originally built to be used by USLHT Medrano, but used independently in the 12th LHD in Northern California waters. Name USLHT Hazel assigned in 1894. As an inspector's tender, it was assigned to the 5th Lighthouse District at Baltimore for its entire career, tending aids on the Virginia coast. It served with the U.S. Navy during the Spanish-American War. Commissioned as USLHT Daisy, and assigned to Staten Island, NY, to be used as an inspector's launch into service Boys and Gedney's Channel in Lower New York Bay in the 3rd LHD. Water Lily was built for the LHS and served as an inspector's launch in the 6th LHD for its entire career. In 1896 it was working the Indian River in Florida. In 1927, it was transferred to the 6th LHD in 1929. Mayflower was placed into service assigned to the 2nd LHD in Boston. In 1924, it was transferred to the 5th LHD. In December 1939, it was decommissioned. It was recommissioned as a tender in the Coast Guard as USCG Mayflower in July 1940 and relocated to Norfolk, Virginia. Mangrove was completed in 1897 and assigned to the 7th LHD at Key West. USLHT Mangrove brought back the surviving wounded to Key West from the exploded USS Maine in Havana Harbor. Later it also brought back guns salvaged off the Maine and American civilians leaving Cuba at the start of the Spanish-American War. In October 1909, while still at Key West, it assisted Revenue Cutter Forward, which had been stranded by a hurricane. By 1922, it had been reassigned to Charleston, South Carolina, in the 6th LHD, where it remained for the rest of its career. Missioned as USLHT Iris in 1899, it was used as an engineering tender in the 4th LHD. It operated out of Philadelphia for most of its career. Replaced by USLHT Lilac, the old Iris was sold in 1934. It was laid in 1902 and it completed in 1903. It was assigned to the 5th LHD at Baltimore as an inspection tender, replacing the old USLHT Bramble. And completed in 1903. Served on the upper Mississippi River, primarily out of St. Louis. Transferred to the War Department, Army, in 1928, and replaced by Uslhs Willow. Built exclusively for service in the Great Lakes, its keel was laid in 1901 and was completed in 1903. USLHT Shumack was assigned to the 9th LHD at Milwaukee as an inspector's tender. In 1925, it was assigned to the 12th LHD as a Bay and Sound tender. $65,000 were authorized on 28 June 1902, and it was completed in 1903. USLHT Hyacinth was assigned to the 9th LHD at Milwaukee on Lake Michigan as an engineering tender, where it spent its entire career. Converted from coal to oil-fired steam in the mid-1930s. Magnolia. assigned as an inspection tender in the 8th LHD at Mobile, Alabama, and occasionally at New Orleans. On August 25, 1945 off Mobile, Alabama, USCG Magnolia was rammed amidships by the new C-3 cargo ship SS Marguerite Lebend. Magnolia sank in 2 minutes, with the loss of 1 life and 49 survivors. IV. A tender for the 7th LHD. Upon completion, it was home ported at Key West, Florida, in the 7th LHD, serving the 7th and 8th LHDs as an engineering tender. In APR 1914, it was relieved by USLHT Myrtle and transferred to the 5th LHD at Portsmouth, Virginia. It replaced the old USLHT Hazel, and took her crew. Upon commissioning in 1905, it was assigned to the 10th LHD, serving out of Buffalo, NY. In 1932, it was converted to oil-fired boilers. By the late 1930s, its home port had been changed to Detroit. In January 1942, USCG Crocus was designated WAGL 210 and served during World War II out of Toledo, Ohio. Upon completion, Aspen was assigned to the 11th LHD at Detroit. A new boiler was installed in 1932. When the Coast Guard assigned hull numbers to all its newly acquired buoy tenders in January 1942, USCG Aspen was designated WAGL 204. For the duration and after World War II, it was home ported at Sault Ste. Marie. She was the first to use wire rope instead of manila. Authorized on April 28, 1904 as an inspection tender for the 4th LHD, it was reassigned from Philadelphia in the 4th LHD to the 8th LHD at New Orleans in January 1913 for the remainder of its career. Just before World War II, she was operating out of Galveston, TX, designated WAGL 247 at the start of WWAL. And Amon. A tender for the 11th LHD, assigned briefly to the 11th LHD. At San Francisco after commissioning, USLHT Anemone was transferred to the 2nd LHD at Boston and Woods Hole around 1915, where it served for the rest of its career. Cypress. A tender for the 6th LHD, it replaced USLHT Wisteria at Charleston, South Carolina in the 6th LHD where it remained for its entire career. Hibiscus. Assigned to the 7th LHD, it was moved to the 1st LHD at Portland, Maine where it served well into World War II. Although not designed for the task, USLHT Hibiscus was called upon for ice-breaking duties on the Kennebec River as early as 1918. It was equipped with wireless, radio, equipment in 1919. Kukui. It started its career in the 12th LHD, then served at Ketchikan, Alaska with the 16th LHD from 1914 to 1917. It was then moved to the 19th LHD at Honolulu in the territory of Hawaii in 1917. Because of a distant duty, it became the first lighthouse tender to be equipped with a wireless radio set. Manzanita. Lead ship of the class, it replaced the old USLHT Manzanita. It was assigned to the old 17th LHD and home ported out of Astoria and Portland, Oregon. During World War II, it laid anti-submarine cables off Prince Rupert, British Columbia, and Dutch Harbor, Alaska. Orchid. A new tender for Long Island Sound in the 3rd LHD. Upon commissioning, it was assigned to the 3rd LHD for a brief period, transferred to replace the aging USLHT Cactus at Baltimore, then Portsmouth, Virginia, for the remainder of its career. Sequoia. Assigned to the 12th LHD at San Francisco upon commissioning, it served there for the rest of its career. It was designated WAGL 243 at the start of World War II. Sequoia was decommissioned with plans to transfer her to the Philippines. Tulip. It spent its entire career assigned to the 3rd LHD, operating out of Staten Island, New York. In 1917, it was the first maritime test platform for an experimental device called a radio compass. Purchased by the LHS in 1908 and commissioned as USLHT-2 Myrtles. It was assigned to the 11th LHD at Milwaukee in the Great Lakes as an engineering tender, then laid up in 1911. It was renamed USLHT Clover. It continued to serve in the Great Lakes, first at Detroit, then at Sault Ste. Marie, working aids on the St. Mary's River. USLHT Clover was rebuilt again in 1932 and lengthened to 93 feet. Built as a shallow water bay tender for work on Lake Pontchartrain in the 8th LHD. Assigned to the 8th LHD at New Orleans, on September 4, 1915, it was driven aground on the Mississippi River Delta, and refloated on October 7 with only minor damage. Planned for Lake Champlain in the 3rd LHD, commissioned as USLHT Woodbine in 1914, and initially assigned to Baltimore in the 5th LHD. It was reassigned to Philadelphia in the 4th LHD in 1915. It was then reassigned to the 4th LHD for the remainder of its career. Keel was laid on 11 June 1914, assigned to the 16th LHD at Ketchikan, AK. Decommissioned and sold in 1934. And waters tender for duty on the Oregon and Washington coast. Upon completion, it was assigned to the 17th LHD and operated out of Astoria and Portland, Oregon. Dandelion in 1917 for use as a river tender, it operated out of Rock Island, Illinois, servicing aids to navigation on the upper Mississippi River, laid up in 1926 and sold the following year. Alaska, during World War I it served with the U.S. Navy in the 17th Naval District.